thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this webinar. My name is Marcella Genut, and I am the founder and CEO of MG College Consulting. I also have, well, that's my own business, but I also work full time as an academic advisor at the University of Georgia, and have graduated with a public relations degree, a communication studies minor, and a disability studies certificate from the University of Georgia. So I'm really excited to be with you all today and just talk more about disability inclusive language and how that affects your students with disabilities in the classroom. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and pull up my presentation. You will get all these materials to you today. So you'll have access to all this information that I go over today. So what we're going to learn about today is what is person first language. If you haven't heard of it, that's okay. It's a fairly new type of language that's developed in the disability civil rights movement, and just kind of learn why it's important, how it makes your students feel, and why you should incorporate that into your classroom. So a little bit about me. I have had a disability my entire life. I grew up in the school system, public school system in Georgia, as the only person with a physical disability and not a cognitive disability. So I kind of paved the way for all the students after me to receive accommodations in the school system that I went through. My mom was my biggest advocate for me and really believed in that I could have a job, move away from home, drive, and go to college by myself. So the bottom left picture is me from preschool. So as my preschool graduation, I was in an inclusive classroom. So no other students really had disabilities except one other kid with me. And my mom made it a mission that I would be in inclusive classrooms since I was really little. And I'm really grateful for that. The school actually wanted to have me go to a special school that was for only students with physical disabilities. And my mom fought with the school system to have me in an inclusive classroom and with my peers because she wanted me to take classes and be with people that were my neighbors and my friends, as opposed to students that I wouldn't ever really see besides school. The top photo above that is me at my first job. I was 18 and worked in an office. It really taught me a lot about professionalism, and I'd actually applied to a lot of jobs and didn't ever hear back. This job was from my amazing neighbor who helped me get it. So it's really important to just network, and for people with disabilities, they have an even harder time securing a job and also networking. I graduated high school. That's the top left photo with me and my family. People and my teachers in high school told me I would never go away to school. I would never move from home. I would never have caregivers or even be accepted to the University of Georgia. So my mom and I kind of made it my mission to prove them all wrong, which I was really happy to do. And thankful too that she instilled that determination in me. And then the photo next to that is me graduating from college. I really enjoyed college. I felt like I really belonged. It was a much more inclusive space than the public school system when I grew up. So it was really a change that anything I needed was automatically fulfilled, where I had to sort of fight for everything while I was in the public school system. And then below is my amazing coordinator from the University of Georgia. So most public schools or colleges have a disability resource center. So depending on how big they are, they may have one person or several people. So she was my coordinator, so I helped uh, really just talk to her about any issues I was having. She would make sure I would have my accessible desk in my classrooms, that the buildings were accessible for me, and just really any accommodations I needed throughout college. So it was really great to have that person by my side. I had a case manager as well in K through 12 school, and she was really amazing as well. So those two people I'm really grateful for. And so, if you haven't heard of People First Language, that's okay. It's the United States really main way of language when talking about people with disabilities. Some European countries use identity first language, but as of now, the United States prefers person first language in their writing, and speaking, and different things like that. With my disability studies certificate, I learned about person first language. I didn't really know it was labeled like that. But the idea is just basically you put the um, person before their disability. So a lot of people um, really want to take back their identity because they were really criticized or bullied or made stereotypes of their disability as opposed to the person. So the disability rights movement wanted to show the world and others that they are a person first, and their disability isn't their entire identity. It was made in about the 1950s. This kind of idea of person first language, and it's really more of a practice and taught in schools now, which is really exciting and informative to others. So let's just dive in. I'm really excited to tell you all about it. So again, like I discussed, it basically takes away the stereotypes and the perceptions and biases that people have about people and their disabilities. So, stereotypes of like people who use wheelchairs, and often one is that they can't talk or think for themselves. So, and also that their wheelchair is kind of their only means of mobility. And you'll probably hear such terms, hopefully not anymore, but potentially confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound. Now the movement is that our wheelchairs are a piece of equipment that helps us with our independence and improves our lives, and we just use a wheelchair. We're not bound to it or confined to it. So that's just one example of kind of how language is switching the perceptions of disability to be more about the person and their strengths and abilities as opposed to their maybe limitations that are with their disability. So here are some great examples. So again, instead of saying like disabled people, it's a person with a disability. Instead of also like able-bodied or normal, you would also say person without a disability. I know that the United States is working on in all of their laws trying to change the R word into a person with an intellectual or developmental disability. Right now, it hasn't been approved, so that would be really huge one day to hopefully remove the R word in our legal systems, because I know that is a point of pain for a lot of people with disabilities. So hopefully we'll make that into a movement. There is a year also each year about end the R word. And there's a campaign just kind of advocating and spreading awareness of how that word should not be used. For people that are deaf, it's a little bit different because they have their own culture. So they actually prefer identity first language, which is where you do put the disability first instead of um, the person first. They also don't really like to hear deaf mute or hearing impaired. If they do like to discuss their hearing loss, they either prefer hearing loss or they have the word deaf with a little d. A capital D is the culture and community of deaf people, basically. So, really, it's kind of hard with different niches of different disabilities, but the best advice I can give is just to always ask the person how they want to be addressed. Um, Deaf culture is an entirely different kind of set of beliefs from a lot of other ones with disabilities. They're still under, obviously, the umbrella of people with disabilities, but they have their own really unique culture that I really encourage you to look up and learn more about because it's really amazing to learn about as well. And same with like visually impaired or the blind, it's a person who is blind or a person who has vision loss. Really anything impaired. I know the school system classifies students with disabilities as, like impaired. I was classified as orthopedically impaired in school, and I would have to read that in my IEPs and hear that in meetings and things. And it honestly really took a toll on my self-esteem and really kind of hurt a little bit because I didn't really see myself as orthopedically impaired. I just saw myself as someone who needed extra assistance to navigate a classroom or the bathroom or my textbooks. And just the word impaired also connotates that there's something kind of wrong with me. Um, so just think about if you were kind of labeled as something impaired, how you would feel about that. Maybe, um, yeah, people just usually don't think about labels in terms of being impaired. So I once met up with a deaf professor, and he said that people who are deaf call people who can hear hearing people, and he asked how that made us feel, and I raised my hand and was like, I just never classify myself as hearing because that's just something that is always about me and it's just who I am, and I don't even really think about it that I can hear. And so that was exactly his point that we don't really think about all the things we can do. It's just part of who we are. Same with a disability, it's just one piece of our identity. It doesn't make up our entire world and who we are. Same with like crippled or handicapped. It's a person with a physical disability, and those are also just more examples of ways you can change your language. I know person first language is also used in terms of addiction and other health conditions that people prefer to use that type of language. So it really is a big movement beyond just people with disabilities. It's really a whole movement across the US on how to identify people as just having, one piece of their identity of a beautiful mosaic that makes them them. And so I really want you to just think about some of these examples that I have listed and just think about what should come first. I kind of mentioned a few of them, but see if you can guess the other ones. Um, damage would typically be a person with a traumatic brain injury. And again, epileptic or diabetic would be a person who has diabetes or a person who is epileptic. That's a hard word to say. Um, Birth defect is also typically someone with a developmental disability. Same with learning disabled. That's really not a word that people with disabilities prefer. Usually it is having cognitive or intellectual disability. Another thing to note about these examples is um, people really prefer it, but not everyone does. I also know that the autism community prefers identity first language as well and likes to write they are autistic or put the label of their diagnosis of autism first. So again, just ask the person, what they prefer. Language really does affect our people with disabilities, really mental health, our self-esteem and how we view things. I remember in school being called that girl in the wheelchair, riding the bus as well. I was classified as like a wheelchair, which honestly really upset me because I am not just a wheelchair, I'm a person that happens to use a wheelchair. So I remember hearing that too, and teachers would say those types of words that really just really hurt, I guess. So I hope that you can do better and that this also helped you kind of learn more about people with disabilities and their language, and how just to be respectful and considerate of people's preferences in terms of language. I'm sure at one point you have been called something that you did not like and kind of address how that feels or felt when it was in that moment. So I hope you take that to heart and just think about how people with disabilities are very often classified or put in these boxes. And immediately, especially if they have a visible disability, how others perceive them and how language kind of explains their perceptions and kind of furthers that narrative. A lot of people with invisible disabilities feel like they have to prove their disability or show that they do have one. A lot of people don't believe them because it isn't visible. So having that bias and being aware of it too is really important to note. And again, just ask the person what they need assistance with, how you can help, what kind of language would they prefer. It really will make a difference in your students' lives and really just help their overall confidence and self-esteem. Immediately when I go outside of my house, I'm pretty much stereotyped by strangers or classified as something. People have called me all kinds of names and things like that. And even kids, in the classroom and my other peers because they just were ignorant. So I hope that this brought you more awareness and things to think about as well. Um, and yeah, I just really hope to really tell others just about disability awareness and inclusivity in language and how that can help. I learned about this in my disability studies classes, which were really helpful. And I encourage you, if you do want to look up different examples in different classes and also the medical model and social model of disability, and also what is identity first language. A lot of European countries actually use identity first language, so it's kind of interesting to hear how each culture has their own nuances with language as well, and how disability also has their own language and is a part of that overall culture of language in a community. So these are just some tips to think about when interacting with a student with a disability or really just anyone. Again, just like always ask what the person would prefer. You're to be afraid of making a mistake or saying the wrong thing is honestly kind of worse than just saying, hey, like, I don't know what to say. How would you like me to address this or say this? It's really a lot kinder to do that instead of completely avoid the subject or, get all nervous and not say anything because you are scared of making a mistake or saying the wrong thing. It is very nuanced and kind of niche of a learning curve when it comes to this type of stuff. So it's okay to be curious. It's okay to have questions and be unsure. And if people will, educate you, it'll make you more aware. Just each person is different in that aspect. Be creative just refers to just thinking ahead of time of like what someone would like to be addressed as or called, even if they're not in the room, just being respectful of how they prefer to be addressed is really important. So even if your student is not in your classroom at that moment, still discussing them with their um, other teachers or caseworker, it's important to also include the language that they would prefer. And of course, it's being respectful. I hate when people ask me questions like, what's wrong with you? Or uh, that you just use a wheelchair, like that girl in the wheelchair. I've heard many times. It's just not really respectful. So just think before you speak about what you're saying and how you can be a little bit kinder to your students and people in general, and also be willing to learn and change your way of speaking. This language could change in a few years, who knows? Uh, you know, Culture and language, even just in English, is constantly evolving and changing, and disability language is no exception to that rule. Um, so just being able to go with the flow and see also what people would prefer is really important if you're unsure. So I just want to think about like if you have ever been called something that you didn't like, how that made you feel. What was that experience? What did they call you? Um, was it just an assumption that they saw? And how did that make you feel in terms of your identity and self-confidence? Did that word kind of frame your narrative of who you are? And even if not, how did that shape how you view yourself? Especially if you hear, you know, a word you don't like about yourself over and over and over again, it's hard to not believe that at times. So even you just making a little difference of changing your language in the classroom really does make a difference in that student's life, and just hearing that you see them and you hear them beyond their disability is such a powerful thing that I want to encourage you all to really do. So those are just some of the things that I hope you learned and took away from this webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I encourage you all to look into this some more because it's really quite fascinating and interesting to learn about. I also found some really great tools about just like disability etiquette in general. So like top tips, how to interact with someone with a disability, working with someone with a disability. And if you just don't know, it's always okay to ask. People who use wheelchairs hate it when you just grab their wheelchair because to them it's like a part of themselves, like a leg or a limb or different things like that. So just asking if someone needs help or, you know, do they need assistance or not, really just shows that you care and is okay. There's lots of different tips in there that are really helpful to think about. And I just want to encourage you all not to be scared of interacting with people with disabilities and your students. It's okay to have these hard conversations. And it also helps people with disabilities think about themselves and educating others and adding that value to the world. Um, so I hope you check those out. You'll also get all these links emailed to you. So as great, this is the links of where I got all of my resources and language and things that I wrote in this PowerPoint. So definitely check it out if you have any more questions. And then we'll collect your email so you get all this material. But I hope you took away some information and awareness about the disability rights movement and just etiquette and language in general when it comes to your students with disabilities, and that you can make a difference in your classroom just by these changes and these little words that really affect a student's self-esteem, mental health, and their confidence. So I hope you enjoy it, and thank you for watching.